With WWE television ratings on a decline, there are some in the wrestling community who are beginning to worry about WWE's drop-off. On the other hand, others will say that many shows are experiencing a decrease in viewers and that it's no big deal. Some are even questioning the very validity of TV ratings as a whole. So, considering controversy like that, it's a perfect time to dig just a little bit deeper by making it the topic of this episode. Because today, Dave knows wrestling television ratings. Let's begin with talking about how ratings actually work, because when it comes to American television, we're talking about the Nielsen ratings. Named after Arthur C. Nielsen, a market analyst who began his research dealing with ratings for radio in the hopes of providing valuable market information. The top 20 programs were examined, with the focus being placed on areas such as cumulative audience, average audience, and total audience, as well as how many homes were reached in relation to the amount of money that was spent on time and talent. Continuing from there in 1950, the Nielsen ratings started moving towards this newfangled invention called television, and they used similar methods that they did for radio when it came to collecting audience numbers for television. But what about those numbers, and how exactly do they apply to the modern era? Well, the system works by getting people who elect to have a Nielsen box placed into their homes. From there, the system records every show that gets watched in those particular households and sends it back to Nielsen. Shows are then giving a rating which represents the percentage of how many participating homes are watching. So a Nielsen rating of 10 means that 10% of Nielsen homes are watching that particular program. Oh, and for those of you in the UK, a similar system is used known as BARB, the Broadcasters Audience Research Board. Now, this strategy does draw some criticism. As you can figure, not every household has a Nielsen box, as it has been reported that Nielsen only uses about 0.03% of households as their study sample. So, as educated of a guess as this might be, it's still hard for many to see this as a completely accurate representation of what people are really watching. Furthermore, there is also another issue that comes up when dealing with Nielsen ratings, because some will say that they are outdated in today's day and age, and a lot of us are just not watching TV in the same way that we used to, like watching shows on demand or across multiple platforms, such as gaming devices. Although, with that being said, it is important to note that Nielsen does actually take this into account, despite what many people might think. However, ultimately, it really doesn't matter, because whether we think this is an accurate depiction as to what people are watching, and regardless as to how Nielsen accounts for online viewership, we really aren't that important of a factor here. Despite being what the ratings are actually gauging, we, the people, are not exactly who they're catering to. The real target audience that needs the information about target audiences is advertisers. This is who the rating system is most valuable for. Companies use ratings to approximate how many potential people will see their television commercial if they choose to buy a slot during that particular show. And on the other end of the television spectrum, networks can determine how much they can charge advertisers for a commercial, with higher ratings meaning a higher cost. On top of all that, Nielsen also collects more information than just how many people are watching, as they also survey those who have Nielsen boxes and get additional information such as race, age, income level, and things of that sort. And with this data, advertisers can target their ads a little more directly. Like, for example, if you have a product that is aimed after young adult males, then you obviously want to focus a lot of your advertising campaign on television shows that have a lot of young adult males as their fan base. And without the Nielsen system and its survey, or at least something like it, it's kind of hard to tell who belongs to what demographic. Not to mention that there's also a difference between how many people are watching something when it first airs versus how many people are watching it on demand. And it really wouldn't be fair to charge companies the same amount of money for one as they would for the other. For example, let's say you have a television show that has 5 million people watching it when it first comes on. Then you only have 1 million viewers who watch the show on demand throughout the course of the next 2 weeks. Well, commercial time during the original airing is clearly more valuable than it is on demand, which is why you normally see different commercials between the two. Oh, and also, let's not forget about DVR, because while it may be great for viewers, it really sucks for advertisers who know that there'll be the portion of the show that gets fast-forwarded right through. Now, continuing with yet another strike to on-demand media, Raw and SmackDown are live. And live programs tend to get less on-demand views than taped ones. When we look at things like sports games, if a fan happens to miss one, they usually just get the scores and the highlights and then move on with their life. And while this may equal less demand for on-demand, this is actually a pretty good thing in terms of money for WWE, because this is presumably one of the major reasons why Fox offered $1 billion for SmackDown. As a live program, the hope would be that SmackDown can counteract any decline in ratings that shows are experiencing, even if it's not all that much. Now, with that billion-dollar deal being brought up, you might be wondering, why exactly are ratings a problem? I mean, they made $1 billion from Fox, so clearly it's not an issue, right? Well, not exactly, because it's time to reminisce about a certain sentiment from CM Punk's famous pipe bomb, and that's the idea that with as much money as Vince McMahon is making, he should be making more. Not to mention that in business, planning out the next 5 months is fine and all, but thinking about the next 5 years is even better. Fox has already shown that they're beginning to get worried about the ratings that SmackDown is currently getting, especially since the sitcom Last Man Standing, which is, as of this recording, what's currently on Fox's 8 p.m. Friday night time slot, is drawing a lot more than SmackDown, with its season 7 premiere bringing in over 8 million viewers, which is about 6 million more than what SmackDown drew around the same time that year. Probably not instilling all that much confidence for the future. And if nothing changes, it would be hard to imagine that Fox would renew the contract once the current one expires. Continuing with the idea that WWE could be making a lot more money and getting higher ratings, let's put things into perspective. First, let's take a look at the most watched networks. The top 3 are NBC, CBS, and ABC. No real surprise there, as these are the original television stations and don't require paying for cable in order to watch them. Next on the list is SmackDown's future home of Fox, on the low end when compared to its regular TV brethren, but still very high nonetheless. And as for SmackDown's current home of USA, that ranks in at a very respectable number 8. Now, being on channels with such high viewership does put WWE at a certain advantage, but also gives them a little bit of a disadvantage too. Being on a network that has so many viewers is great knowing that you are part of such a popular brand, however, it's bad in the sense that it means that these networks have a much higher bar. While having 2 million viewers might be alright if they were on a lesser viewed station, it's not gonna cut it for the big boys. And might I also point out that the argument that everybody is experiencing falling ratings isn't exactly true. While USA did drop 9% in 2018 in comparison to 2017, NBC went up the exact same amount, so another myth dispelled. But NBC wasn't alone in this, as other channels gained viewers too in 2018. Which channels are these? Well, they're the number 5 and number 6 most watched networks of 2018, Fox News and MSNBC, news stations. Now, where am I going with this? Well, I'm bringing this up because this is where the big money is for collecting ad revenue. We need to be looking at the specific companies that are willing to pay for ad time, and we also need to look at how much they're willing to spend and where they're willing to spend it. And news stations seem to be the place where companies like to buy their ad time. Let's just look at CNN. While they may be weighed down as the 22nd most watched network in 2018, they were the channel that has received the most amount of money in ad revenue from pharmaceuticals. And when we take a step back and look at all of the top companies who are buying airtime, we'll notice that pharmaceutical companies are shelling out a lot of big bucks for commercials, along with other things like dieting products, insurance companies, and cell phone services. Overall, we can see with just a little bit of pattern recognition that these products tend to be aimed more at adults rather than children, and they also tend to be more universal products that don't have very specific demographics. So while knowing things like the age, race, and gender of an audience is great if your product has a very specific demographic, it really doesn't matter all that much if you're the television show, as the biggest bucks are brought in by products that have an appeal to mostly everyone. And while WWE does have ads from companies like these, perhaps they need to be appealing to them just a little bit more, especially since when you think about it, it's a fairly natural fit. While WWE may not be a news program, they do have a more adult audience, not to mention that weight loss and fitness are definitely prime fodder that WWE can easily pitch since they're a company full of in-shape wrestlers. Oh, and one last thing, I want to go back to one of the original concepts of the Nielsen system back from its radio days that I think has some bearing now. Remember when I said that Nielsen measured how much money was being spent for time and talent in relation to how many homes were being reached? Well, I would like to point out May 27th's Raw rating of only 2.19 million viewers and Brock Lesnar's $12 million salary. Just saying. In the end, yes, Nielsen ratings may not be fully accurate, but they also don't have to be because they're still what advertisers are looking at. And even though Nielsen ratings may just be beginning to take things into account such as on-demand video, it also doesn't really matter since the audience for that is not as large for wrestling as it is for other shows. Plus, advertisers really don't place as much priority on those services anyway. And while you can still make a lot of money without high ratings, it still tends to be the biggest appeal for advertising dollars. And advertisers have some pretty deep pockets. But what do you think about WWE's ratings decline? Let me know down in the comments. And please support this show over on Patreon, just like The Woos, Jesus Farrell, and Richard Lee. Thank you so much for the support, guys. And as always, Dave knows.